Alright guys, Dominic here for Kit Guru, and today it is actually GTX 1070 Ti launch day. So we're looking at this card here in front of me, which is the MSI 1070 Ti Gaming 8G. And if you head over to kitguru.net, you'll also find our review of the Palette Super Jetstream card. But with this video, it's just on the MSI card, so you have to head over to our main site if you want to check out that review. But we got two done for launch day, had to work very hard, tell you. But this video is actually, we're going to focus very much on the heatsink, the cooler, noise levels, thermals, as well as power draw and acoustics of this MSI card. That's because, if you didn't know already, all 1070 Ti's actually ship with the same clock speeds across the board. There's no factory overclocking when it comes to aftermarket 1070 Ti's. So essentially what that means is, when you factor in GPU Boost 3.0 technology, the better the cooler, the more thermal headroom there is for the GPU core, the higher the core frequency will go, which equates to real world performance. 1070 Ti performance is very much linked intrinsically to the cooler of the card. So that's why in this video we are going to talk about actual gaming performance a little bit. It's not going to be our main focus because you can see all of our charts over on kitguru.net. But if you are interested in the more technical side of things, this video, this MSI Gaming 8G, it's very much going to be for you. So, right, diving straight into the design of this card, you can immediately notice that the black and red colour scheme is here to stay. MSI, this is a staple of their gaming range, so if you don't like it, you're frankly going to have to lump it. It's their highest end 1070 Ti, the Gaming 8G. Personally, I actually think it's a very good looking cooler. I love the red accent, but you know, that's just me speaking personally. I know a lot of people these days want something completely colour neutral, be it black, maybe with hints of silver or grey, and they can customise the colour scheme themselves with RGB lighting. But that is not what MSI has done. They're sticking to their guns resolutely. It's a gaming card, it's black and red. Looking closer at the card though, we can see these 200mm fans at the front. They should hopefully provide very good airflow. Obviously we'll touch on noise levels, acoustics, thermals later. But then those two fans blow directly onto a fin array at their heatsink, which actually uses 5 nickel-plated 8mm heat pipes, I believe. But we'll be disassembling the card very shortly to look at that heatsink in more detail. Now, along the side here, we've also got 6 and 8-pin power connectors, which is actually more than the Founders Edition 1070 and 1080. Both of those cards ship with a single PCIe, a single 8-pin PCIe power connector rather. So I reckon the 6 and 8-pin is just there to give you that extra headroom when it comes to power draw for overclocking if you need it. Up this side, we've actually got the RGB lighting. This is the MSI Dragon logo, which lights up any colour of the rainbow. You can choose that. You can pick your colour in MSI Mystic Light, which is their RGB app. Down here, however, you've got some red-only LEDs on the shroud. This bit here is just plastic, but these here are red-only LEDs, so they can either be on or off, but they can only be red. So bear that in mind when it comes to tinkering with your RGB lighting. Now, next up, actually, all that remains is for us to look at the card itself and the heatsink, the PCB and heatsink. So I need to quickly disassemble this card and we'll be back very shortly. Okay, the card has been disassembled and I realised I completely forgot to show you the back plate. It's very nice, just a thin piece of metal, feels probably like thin steel. It's not brushed, but it's got the MSI Dragon logo over there on the side. It looks good and I'd much rather it was there than it wasn't. But focusing on the actual heatsink, what we're here to see, as I mentioned, it's got 5 nickel-plated copper heat pipes, and they are of the 8mm variety. So it's actually plenty of cooling performance there. It utilizes a nickel-plated copper contact plate, which is much more efficient than having direct contact between the heat pipes and the GPU core. This way, the heat pipes will draw the heat out of that contact plate into the fin array, and then the fans will blow the air through there and keep everything cool. So as I mentioned, 5 nickel-plated heat pipes. The actual fin array is not very thick because, as I mentioned, this is just a dual slot card. However, it does span essentially the whole length of the cooler, so they've maximized surface area that way. And as you'll see in a minute, cooling performance is actually very, very good. There are also 3 little connectors here. This one is for the RGB LED, and then you've got your fan and fan power, I believe, over there. And then flipping over, as I mentioned, you've got the 2 200mm fans. I did forget to say that this card actually features zero frozer technology, so when your GPU core drops below 60C, the fans will actually turn off. So that's great if you're browsing the web, emailing, watching YouTube, whatever it may be. You should be able to do it in silence because the fans will not be spinning. So that is the heatsink. Put that over to one side. Next up we have the PCB. MSI gave a generous amount of thermal paste, so it's kind of looped everywhere. It's a custom PCB, 6 and 8 pin power as I mentioned, and there's also this contact plate here which is over the VRAM and VRMs. You've also got thermal pads on the chokes and caps, which is good to see. It's the GP104 core as well, worth saying, which is actually the same chip used in the 1080, so it's essentially just a shaved down 1080. 2,432 CUDA cores, whereas a 1080 has 2,560. So this card is actually closer to the 1080 than the 1070, despite its name. Right then, so that is a look at the card and the PCB and the heatsink. What about actual performance figures? I'll put the charts up for you now, but it's actually worth saying immediately that this is the quietest card I have tested over the last few months. It's the quietest card that's come into me, which is actually very impressive. 1070 Ti obviously isn't the most powerful cards I've tested, so there is that to consider, but this implementation is effective purely in terms of acoustics. Thermal is also very decent as well. As you can see, this card comes second place only to the Gigabyte G1 1080, which is a triple fan cooler, which probably explains that one, but still excellent cooling performance as you can see here. And lastly, power draw. It's also actually surprisingly efficient, second only to the 1070. This MSI card actually drew less power than the palette as well. As you can see there, it's hovering around the 240, 250 watt power draw, and that's under extreme load, so it's not going to go higher than that. So in that regard, I think the cooler is a great success. We'll talk in a minute how it impacts upon actual gaming performance, but speaking purely about the actual heatsink and the custom PCB, everything works very nicely there, so I am very happy with that aspect of the design. Right, so that was the look at the heatsink done. I've put the card back together, and now we're going to talk about actual gaming performance. We're not talking about noise or acoustics anymore. Let's talk about actual games, actual frame rates. So, as I mentioned, I have tested the Palette Super Jetstream 1070 Ti, which I actually did an unboxing of last week. I tested that alongside this MSI card for launch, and I'm going to put the charts up on the screen to show you, rather than me actually just reading off numbers you could read yourself. But the general trend is this MSI Gaming 8G card is generally around 1 to 2 frames per second slower than the Super Jetstream card when it comes to games, and you can also see that in 3D Mark as well. It just doesn't score quite as high. It's far from a massive difference, but it's that couple frames per second. So if you're looking for actual the fastest card out of the box, the card with the most raw power, that is the Palette card over this MSI card. However, part of me does wonder if MSI has, instead of focusing all of their energies on creating the fastest card, they actually focus more on getting something cool and quiet. As I mentioned, this is one of the coolest running cards I've seen recently. It's actually the quietest card I've tested over recent months, which, as I mentioned previously. So perhaps part of me wonders if the raw speed isn't there because they decided actually we can make a fast card, it won't be the fastest, but we can also make it quiet and cool as well. Now, let's move on to overclocking. The big thing with the 1070 Ti was, of course, people were speculating that overclocked 1070 Ti will be around 1080 levels, so it's interesting to see whether that would pan out. And with my overclock, I added 100 MHz to the GPU core and plus 625 to the memory. I actually found that, again, I'll put the charts up for you so I don't have to keep telling you the numbers. My findings were that this MSI card was actually very close to our gaming G1 1080 from Gigabyte. It wasn't quite there, it was very close, so roughly speaking, I would say this 1070 Ti overclocked is just about a stock 1080. The palette card, as I mentioned, did actually manage to exceed a 1080 level in a few times, but you have to read that review for more details. But overall, this MSI card with a hefty overclock, as far as I could push it but keep it stable, it's roughly a 1080. It's not quite, but it's very close across most tests, and realistically you probably wouldn't know the difference. It's 1070 Ti launch day, and I've been reviewing this MSI GTX 1070 Ti Gaming 8G. I've also reviewed the Palette Super Jetstream, but you have to head over to kitguru.net for that. And essentially this card is very cool and very quiet. It isn't as fast as the Palette card out of the box, but it's definitely cooler and quieter. It's also a bit more efficient in terms of power. Aside from me recommending it wholeheartedly, there is pricing to consider, because at the minute in the UK this card is retailing, you can pre-order it now for £489, which if you shop around, or if you keep on top of the current prices, that's actually right in GTX 1080 territory. So you can actually pick up the Gigabyte G1 Gaming 1080 for the same price. So really, no matter how fast this 1070 is, no matter how fast, how cool or how quiet it is, if it's the same money, you're going to go for the 1080 every time. It's just faster. Especially when you overclock it, it's going to be faster. The 1070 Ti just doesn't have the raw power. So I don't want to be too damning, because I think, you know what launch prices are. I think eventually over the coming weeks and months we could hopefully see the prices drop down, because I really do think that the 1070 Ti definitely has a place, but I think it should be priced more in line around the £430, maybe £440 mark, because that puts it neatly between the 1070 and the 1080. At the minute, they're the aftermarket 1070 Ti's. They're all a bit too close to the 1080 for my liking. You have got the Founders at $419, but I didn't get one of those in, so it's likely to be a lot louder and a lot hotter running. So speaking for this MSI 1070 Ti, it's cool, it's quiet, but it needs a price cut to actually make it worthwhile. So it'll be interesting over the coming weeks and months if that actually happens. So I'm Dominic for KitGuru. It's GTX 1070 Ti launch day. This has been the MSI Gaming 8G. If you like this video, give us a thumbs up, hit like, hit subscribe if you haven't already, and you can also check us out on social media. We're over on Facebook and Twitter, so it'll be good to have you follow us over there, and we'll interact with you guys over there. And I'll see you in the next video.